This is the last announcement to be made from the studios of 2SM at Australia House, Clarence Street, Sydney. Following the 8 o'clock time signal, the voice you will hear will be the voice of the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable J.J. Carl, who is honouring us this evening by officially opening our new studios at 257 Clarence Street, Sydney.
When the station first commenced broadcasting, its equipment was the most modern and up-to-date in Australia. In the early days, the station operated from 2 studios in Australia House. By 1939, these had been extended to 5, including a large audience studio, which at the time was the only auditorium of its kind in Australia. After Monsignor Meany's death, the Reverend Dr. T. Muldoon became managing director. 2 years later, Dr. Muldoon was appointed Dean of the Faculty of Theology at St. Patrick's College, Manly, and the Reverend Father M. Prendergast succeeded him as managing director. In turn, Father Prendergast has now been succeeded by that very able administrator, Father Coughlin, who is presiding at this opening ceremony tonight. I might mention that Dr. Muldoon and Father Prendergast are still directors of the station, despite the arduous nature of the work they have to do in other fields. It is interesting to recall some of the well-known radio personalities who have been associated with the success of 2SM. Perhaps the most outstanding of these was John Dunn, who resigned in 1953 after a long and brilliant career with the station. John Dunn was the founder of Uncle Tom's Gang, which became one of 2SM's most popular programs. John Dunn, studio manager, was Uncle Tom to countless thousands of children in 1953. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those children, now grown to adulthood, still affectionately call him by that name when they meet him in the street or elsewhere. In 1934, 2SM studio staff, in addition to John Dunn, consisted of Dom Harnett, chief announcer, Tommy J, Doreen Mackay, W.A. Betty, Fred Webber, Keith Ashdown, George Wollaston, pianist Mari Ormiston, and Stan Nagel. Apart from these, other well-known personalities announcing from 2SM during the 30s included Robert McCall, now an ABC variety director, Ken Howard, the well-known sporting commentator, Henry Millard, Brisbane's Ajax, Camden Morrisby, still handling 2SM's book review, John Tuttle, 2GB Macquarie executive producer, and Dick Fair, the popular compere. I am told that in 1934, 2SM pioneered the first actuality broadcast of a musical comedy. The broadcast from Sydney's Theatre Royal was the White Horse Inn. I'm informed also that 2SM actually pioneered the amateur hour. Another name inseparably associated with the station's activities is that of Dr. Rumble, who has been conducting Question Box since New Year's Day, 1932. With 1939 and the war came changes. John Dunn, Dom Harnett, and Tommy J were still on Monsignor Meany's staff. They were joined by John Sherwood, who is so well known to you all. With the exception of John Dunn, they are on 2SM's staff to this day. Tribute must also be paid to former 2SM managers, Lance Quirk, the station's first manager, Bernie Stapleton, and Kevin Byrne, as well as to men of such outstanding loyalty as John Kennedy, Walter Hartley, Len Hancock, and others who worked behind the scenes. Such personalities as Tony Withers, Gary O'Callaghan, and the indefatigable Tom Jacobs have also been on 2SM's announcing staff. With the introduction of television, radio has changed. Big feature productions are diminishing and being replaced by musical programs. Announcers have become personalities and have acquired a new significance. And as radio has changed, 2SM has changed too. To maintain its position as the leading commercial station, 2SM has kept in touch and instituted modern programming trends. It has concentrated on building up its personalities, its music, and its news. And as a commercial enterprise, 2SM continues to be an outstanding success. No greater evidence of this could be provided than the new studios which have now been erected and which I understand are the most modern of their kind in Australia. They are a monument to the great success which has attended the work of the station since its inception. The new headquarters here at 257 Clarence Street comprise 3 floors. On the studio floor there are 3 studios. A and B are the normal announcing studios, and C, the audience studio from which we are broadcasting tonight. Both studios, A and B, incorporate the latest acoustics and are floated. Floated, ladies and gentlemen, is a process whereby the studio itself is built inside another room and floated on cork. Also on this floor are the master control room, recording control, C production booth, and the program department. Listeners would be particularly interested if they could have a glance at the administrative floor, which is beautifully finished in silver ash timber and contains, in addition to the executive offices, the general office. The ground floor provides ample space for the parking of cars, so in all, I think it will be a very happy family that will be housed within this building. I congratulate the station on the program it has planned for this historical night, one which traces the history of 2SM and the history of popular music back to the year when it first came on the air. Now I have very great pleasure in declaring these fine studios officially open.
Thank you very much, sir. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Chairman of Directors of 2SM, Father Coghlan.
Mr. Premier, gentlemen, on behalf of Station 2SM, I thank the Premier this evening for attending this ceremony and officially opening our new studios. Tonight is, of course, an historic night in the life of 2SM. The late Monsignor James Meany, the founder of 2SM, planned that the station should have its own studios. And as John Dunn mentioned earlier in the evening, his spirit is undoubtedly hovering with us here this evening. It is our joy tonight to see the fulfillment of his plan. And, Mr. Premier, if I may say so, it is an added joy that we have you to be the first speaker into the microphones of our new studio. I thank all the guests for coming with us this evening and helping us fittingly to celebrate this great occasion. I thank the architects, Minute, Cullersill and Peterson, and the builders, McConnell and Fear and their subcontractors, for their cooperation over the past months in providing 2SM with this, as the Premier said, the most modern studios in Australia. And finally, 2SM says thank you to Amalgamated Wireless of Australia for the many years of their friendly cooperation, and also for the technical equipment and the technical efficiency of these, our new studios.
Thank you very much, Father. And now I present to you 2SM's General Manager, Mr. W. Stevenson.
Thanks very much, Dom, and good evening, listeners. I want to address my few remarks tonight, firstly to my directors and secondly to our listeners. To our directors, on behalf of every member of the staff, I want to say a very, very sincere thank you for providing us with these magnificent premises in which to do our work. It's very nice to know that our directors have such confidence in the future of radio to support us in this way. We've only just concluded in our industry the first Radio Week celebrations in Australia, and it is rather fitting that my directors saw fit to give us permission to erect these glorious premises at a time when radio is really putting every energy into really letting the people know just what radio does mean to them. So we are very, very thankful to our directors for providing us with these premises. Secondly, I want to say to our listeners, our vast army of unseen listeners, that we thank them very, very sincerely for their loyal listening to our program throughout the years, and we hope for their continued listening. We also thank them for their strong support of our advertisers. You see, in commercial radio, your advertising revenue is your only income, so without advertisers and without advertisers supported by listeners, well then we just wouldn't have any commercial stations. So we do thank our listeners very, very much for their loyal support. I would just like to say before closing, the Premier has already mentioned that our program policy these days is tailored along what we consider to be modern requirements, inasmuch as we are endeavouring to provide first-class musical programs of all types throughout the day. At the present time, we are scheduling something like 17 hours of music every day for our listeners, and we are programming programs from hit parades, Purple People Eaters, and the like, right up to the best classical programs. So we feel it's our duty to provide entertainment for every member of the family. That's why we call ourselves the Family Station, and in doing so we know that we must provide music of all types to meet all requirements. With these beautiful new studios and the glorious facilities we have here, we can definitely promise our listeners that our very good musical programs in the past are going to be even better in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stevenson. I want you to come back in retrospect with me to Christmas Eve, 1931, when at 8 p.m., John Dunn pulled down a switch and made the first announcement, "This is station 2SM Sydney." This was the culmination of the dream of our late revered founder of 2SM, Monsignor James Meany. I can imagine his feelings on that night when he saw a dream grow into a reality. All he had planned, all he had struggled for, had now materialized. Here was 2SM. On that night, Amalgamated Wireless Australasia Limited, who supplied the equipment, was represented by Mr. L.A. Hook, now Sir Lionel Hook. The late A.S. MacDonald, Chief Engineer, Mr. E.A. Burberry, and Mr. Joe Reed. The technical operating staff comprised H. Tewson, Doug Gowdy, who incidentally is still with us, and W. Ringrose, V. Sims, and V. Stanley, officer in charge, were on duty at the transmitter. After the official opening speeches, the first record ever heard on this station was played. Chosen by Mr. MacDonald, as a recording of high technical and musical standard at that time, it was Weber's Invitation to the Waltz. And I think it would be appropriate if the first record ever broadcast from our new studios should be that same piece of music. And I think if Mr. MacDonald were here tonight, he would agree that the high technical and musical standard of that particular record in 1931 is quite definitely excelled by the magnificent present-day interpretation of it, heard now on microgroove from the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Eugene Ormandy. The recording is by Coronet.